I'm sitting here in the chart room bar of the QE2 hotel, and I'm very privileged and honoured to be sitting with Mr. Clifford Oliver, whom I met for the first time on Friday evening past. What began as an innocuous conversation and indeed just a chat ended up being a wonderful opportunity to learn so much about the history and heritage of the QE2. Clifford, you're very welcome. Lovely to see you again this morning.
And you, sir?
Yeah, thank you.
Very kind. Thank you to looking after us on board.
You're very welcome. We had some fun on Friday night.
We had great fun.
I have a photograph of you up a ladder at some stage.
Yes.
Tell me, so let's go back a few steps. Why are you here? What was the reason, and how did you end up being up a ladder in the Golden Lion Bar on the QE2 on Friday night?
Well, two reasons for being here. One is that in 1972, in fact, on the 18th of May 1972, I was one of the four-man team that jumped into the Atlantic to look for bombs aboard the QE2. The reason I'm here now is that this is 50 years later.
Wow.
Since then, and a Special Forces reunion was being held here in the QE2. And the person that organised it asked me if I would talk about part of the history of this great vessel.
You know, we take for granted, because we see so many movies nowadays about guys just jumping into the water, but this was 1972, right? I mean, it was in mid-Atlantic. Mm-hmm. You were jumping from, what I understand, 800 feet from a Hercules, right? I mean, it sounds easy, but it must have been incredibly difficult.
The problem with it was also with that year there was a lot more large icebergs floating further south in the Atlantic than several years before. The QE2 did not return to Southampton on its normal route. It went further south near the Azores.
Oh.
So that's why we were so far out in the Atlantic.
And it took you 4 hours to get there, I think you told me?
The flight from UK with the C-130 was 4-hour flight, just over 4 hours. What other thing that people don't realise is that while we were flying down, a Nimrod reconnaissance aircraft, marine reconnaissance, flew down as well ahead of us to locate the QE2 and then to become the radio link between the C-130 and Captain Law on board the ship, Captain Law and us, Captain Lord and the British government.
Wow.
So they were links all round to keep us going.
But you know, I mean, I can't imagine. I've swum in the ocean, but I can't imagine. Obviously, you've bought some not packaging, but I'm guessing equipment and all of the necessary paraphernalia that you were going to use.
The bomb disposal equipment was duplicated so that if we lost one package, we still had the capability of doing the job.
And I think you said there was 4 of you.
There was 4 of us. There was myself from the SAS, 2 from SBS, second, Richard Clifford and Tom Jones, not the singer.
Not the singer.
And Edwards, who was the bomb disposal man himself, the EOD man. And the idea was that he had never ever jumped into water, never mind the sea. He'd done 3, early on in his career in the military, he'd done 3 land drops, which they sometimes did with some officers. So he had no idea of the procedure for getting in and out of his parachute properly. And on the 4-hour trip down with the boat, he was constantly shown, practiced, so as he would get it right. Because prior to him joining us on the aircraft, he'd had exactly 1 hour's training by the RAF parachute school. And literally, and you're right about the conditions. The conditions were not as we were told.
Okay.
You know, the cloud base was between 300 and 400 feet.
And what would you normally jump from?
You jump from, the minimum is 800 with a sort of kit. We go in, normally you'd come out at 1,000, but the skipper gave us the minimum height to allow us to be able to use a reserve parachute if anything went wrong with the main. And so when we got there, the captain said, any normal operations, I would not drop you. Conditions are not, they're wrong. And he said to us, it is entirely your decision, gentlemen. Everybody just said, go. So he actually did 3 runs. He came in on the first one to try and pinpoint A, the pickup boat,
Right.
B, the QE2, because you've got to realise that at 300 feet, when he pulled the nose up and put full throttle on, he couldn't see the QE2 either.
Ah, of course.
And it was, so he went in on the first run, we were in the door, we didn't go out, came in on the second run, and when we heard the old engines full rev and it tilted back and he went nose up fast, and as he got to 800 feet and leveled out, we got negative G. We were floating in the aircraft. Even with 60 odd pound on, that was off the deck too. And
Wow.
you've got to imagine, I'm number one in the door, Tom's behind me. You've got an air dispatcher holding onto the side of the door on one side, holding me, another air dispatcher on the other side holding Tom, and as the green light went on, he threw me out, but his feet weren't on the deck either.
He was almost floating.
We were all floating because of this negative G when the pilot pulled out at 800 feet.
And then you landed into... How long did it take you to land?
Not long.
No, not long enough.
Not long.
And you had 60 pounds of equipment with you.
Yes.
Right. And I think you told me you were already kitted out in a dry suit.
Yes. We were flown out in the dry suit. We drew that up in UK. But the C-130 did a great job.
Getting you to the location.
Getting us to the place. But just as good a job was the recovery guys in the lifeboat.
I was thinking about that when we met on Friday night, because that's why I asked you what time of the day it was. Because having been in the Atlantic Ocean, I know what swells. My family dive, and I know even with small swells, it's very hard to see somebody. So tell me a little bit about that. When you landed in the water, how long? Was it a lifeboat that collected you?
Yes.
Okay.
It was one of the bigger ones with the 2 sort of little cabins in it.
Yes, I saw a photograph. Yes.
Yes. They were good, excellent.
Really.
They really did. They got to us as fast as they could. Their biggest problem wasn't finding us, it was getting the equipment we had into the boat, out of this wave,
down in the water.
and down.
Yes, yes.
And that was the problem. Once they got us, the photographs you see of 2 parachutists coming through the cloud, that wasn't us. At the time we dropped, Captain Law was explaining to the passengers what had happened, and that this was a British
Special
Forces team coming aboard to deal with if there was the bombs. The thing was that by the time they then got out on deck looking for us, they'd seen the aircraft.
Yes.
We were in the water.
Oh.
It was the second 2 that came out.
I've seen a video, right? Yeah, 1970s
they
video,
were the 2 that came out. That's the 2 you saw.
The second 2, yeah, okay.
There was no equipment hanging below them. So they were fairly free. It was so that Richard Clifford could help Edwards, who'd never been in the water.
Okay.
See, you have to understand that on a water jump, we had all this equipment attached to our harness, then a reserve sitting above it. Once you're out and deployed and things are working all right, you drop this onto a length of rope, which is attachment to your harness itself. You then, there's a strip around the back of the old parachute, which they call the seat strap, and you push yourself back into that as you would into a strip.
Okay.
So that's round under part of your legs. You then detach one side of the reserve chute and hang it down here. You haven't got a reserve then.
This is all when you're rapidly
Yes.
descending through the
You
air.
then turn the harness buckle, break it, drop the leg straps off, so you're sitting in this, and the front shoulder straps off, and you hold on. So for the last couple of 100 feet, you're not strapped in. And
So you hit the water, obviously.
well, just before
Yeah.
you hit when this bundle hit the water, you can let go. You know it's 10 feet. So
okay,
you
yeah.
just drop out of your parachute.
My God. So tell me, you landed in the water, right?
Yes.
The guys from the QE2 were very good. They got you on board.
They got us on board, and as soon as we were on board, we could see the others coming down. Well, we just got on board as we saw them coming down. And of course, we had something to head for then,
Okay.
and so the second pickup was much better.
Okay.
The biggest problem we had was connecting the boat back to the shackles to winch
winch it.
it back up. And they winched us because we said, "How are we going to get aboard?" And they said, "Back the way
Back
we
the way
came."
Was there ever any concern about time? You know,
Yes.
was there a threat about, for
Yes, there
example,
was.
2 or 3 o'clock?
1800 hours.
Oh, really?
That's right. It was said that if they hadn't received the ransom, the things would detonate by 1800 hours on the 18th there.
And I mean, obviously, now that I'm on board the QE2 and I see how vast it is, you couldn't possibly have been able to search the ship in that amount
No.
of time.
There was nobody could. What we did was when we were on the way down, it was asked the captain by radio, there was a principle of if you didn't need the luggage on board the QE2 in your cabin, and it was you'd taken more, you were
Okay.
going on holiday, there was a lockable room that baggage not required on voyage could be stowed.
Oh, okay. Baggage not required. Okay, I'd never heard that term.
Now,
Okay.
they were, we knew about this.
Okay.
The other problem was that there were cars on board this ship. And it was this business of the Americans wanting their car in Britain or in France and places like that. You put the car on board and you flew over.
Okay.
So it was,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
drive, but fly.
Yes. Okay.
And so this is what was happening. So we knew from talking on the radio that there were a few cars
okay.
on board, and we asked for all the baggage that was in the store to be collected by the passengers on the principle that you ain't going to pick up something that's a bomb and take it into your own little
Okay.
cabin, are you?
Okay.
So when we got aboard, the first thing we were briefed by the captain was that there were still 3 suitcases
Oh, wow.
left. So having been told that there was a possibility bombs were in suitcases, that was priority 1.
Okay.
Edwards and myself worked together on those. The 2 SBS guys did the cars,
Okay.
and started on the cars. And we were running short of time because by the time we got here it was sort of mid-afternoon.
Yeah.
He picked the 2 smaller suitcases and picked
So
the
there were
locks.
suitcases that were not collected.
3 of them.
Ah, okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
So it took a long time to get into them. Obviously, you can't go in case it's booby trapped. And by the time we got into them and realised that there was nothing there, that was a hoax, we still had this one large suitcase. And we were running out of time. We did not have enough time to start playing around with the locks to try and see if we could open it. So what we decided was we would blow it open.
On the ship.
Yeah, not with explosives. They had a device called a pig stick,
Okay.
which fired a water jet at high velocity. And it's used now to destroy bombs. And
I've
things
seen
like
them. Yeah.
You've
Did you
seen
bring
them.
that with you?
Yes, we had those with
Okay.
us. We had all this with us in
Okay.
that bay.
Yeah.
So we rigged up and we blew it apart. If you imagine somebody's had a wedding and there's confetti all around the floor,
Yes.
this was polythene bags ripped apart with brand new shirts, underwear, socks, all out.
Beautifully ironed and stored.
Oh, very nicely stored. It was not quite so well stored when we finished, but time.
Yeah,
We
give
had
you
no
no
option.
choice. So there must have been a huge sense of relief to discover that, in fact, the threat
Well, with
appeared
the
to be
doors, the cars had been done as well, so
Okay.
we were much happier that we'd answered the main threat as we saw it. But the other thing was that we came out of there, Edwards and myself, and the purser came up and he said, I've just had the passenger come to me and said he hasn't retrieved his 3 suitcases. Are they all right? Well, one isn't.
Two are.
Two are.
So tell me, did you, obviously not having found anything in the luggage room or the cars, did you check any other place aboard the ship?
Yes. The 2 major places were the engine room,
Okay.
and we hadn't an idea, any of us, of what was in the engine room, the size of it.
Well, I've seen the engine room here, and
Massive.
it's vast.
Yes. So what we did was we got hold of the chief engineer, because he knew the place, and said to him, was any part replaced while you were in New York? Did anybody deliver anything? And there were 2 things I think he'd replaced, but he knew that they were
Okay.
stuff that they'd had on board.
Okay.
So we eliminated it as best we could using his technical knowledge.
And his knowledge of the engine room
Yes,
itself.
right.
Yeah.
And the next place was the powerhouse,
Okay.
the generators.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah,
did
naturally.
exactly the same there, used the senior man
Okay.
who said, no, nobody's been in his place. They've been working on it in there over the period of the short time they were in New York.
So tell me, throughout all of this, the guests, because I know there was about 1,800 guests on board.
Yes, it was a little under the I think the capacity was 2,000 something, and the crew could go to 900 and something.
Yes.
And I think it was short of, in both cases, of being full, but there was enough on board.
But were they concerned, scared? Were they all aware of what was happening?
Only when we jumped. Captain Law, they agreed he would try and keep it as calm as he could.
Okay.
Don't cause
Okay.
panic.
Yeah.
Tell him when something was happening. The passengers, the thing was that at the time, all 4 of us belonging to specialised units wanted to keep our identity
Secret.
secret, closed. We were given clothing by Cunard from the shops.
I wanted to ask about you. You hardly had a separate suitcase flying with your luggage for the next 4 days.
We had a dry suit.
Yes, that's it.
And the captain said to the purser, take the gentlemen along to the shops and get what they need.
But so having discovered that there was nothing of concern on board, and then rendered all safe. So did the helicopter come back and collect you, or did you stay on board?
We stayed on board, and the thing was, there was 2 things. We stayed on board, and we didn't introduce ourselves to the
Naturally,
passengers.
yeah.
Captain, we had rooms near the up in the top, and we used the wardroom
Okay.
for meals. But the idea was that when the boat got to Southampton, the pilot boat would come aboard for the pilot to bring her into dock. We would get on board the pilot ship and get off at the army camp across the way from Southampton, Marchwood. This was all planned with the pilot, with the captain. We then got a radio signal from the Ministry of Defence saying, no, this is good press for the military. You are going in front of the press whether you like it or not.
That's very unusual for special forces.
All commanding officers have been told they have no say in it.
Oh, that's very unusual.
Yeah, it was, believe me. We were not happy.
Yeah, I can imagine back in 1972, yes.
So we got near Cherbourg and we said to Captain Law, this is very unfair on the passengers. The press are going to get to talk to us before them. So he said, well, what do you want to do? We said, introduce us to the passengers.
Oh, wow. So
And
you
then-
met all the passengers?
We signed everything.
Well, you've very graciously brought me a lovely memento this morning that we're going to put on the QE2
Yeah.
from the Daily Telegraph, signed by the 4 members of the team.
But the thing was that, I mean, the passengers were great. They really were. And I think you got a copy of the receipt. 600 and odd pound they raised for SAFA.
I saw the receipt and I wanted to ask you about that. Okay, so that was raised for SAFA,
Yeah,
the
by
Special
the
Forces
passen-
Association.
Yeah, the service. Well, all three services.
All 3 services, okay.
And that was for SAFA, done by the passengers.
Lovely. Okay,
So
thank you.
that was the reason for that. And then at Cherbourg, the Ministry of Defence sent a press officer
Okay.
on board, and he told us what we can say or not say. And we went to the press first in Cherbourg. Then, when we got to Southampton, and the photographs you have were in uniform,
Yes.
all the wives had to come down with a representative from each unit, bringing our uniforms with them, which didn't please us. But
Yeah, I can understand.
anyway, those photographs, that's why we're in uniform.
In uniform, okay.
At
okay,
the end.
Okay.
But yes, it was quite incredible, really, because from not being seen by anybody after the first initial thing to,
Being front page.
yeah,
We're here today and it's 2022 and it is almost like a golden jubilee celebration after your heroics. I'm the general manager here at Clifford and I just want to say thank you ever so much, right? Albeit I'm not Captain Law, but 50 years later we are still here, and in no small part thanks to the wonderful efforts of you and your colleagues back in the 18th of May 1972. It's a wonderful pleasure to have you here. It was lovely to meet you on Friday night and to engage with you. Right. Thank you and Audrey for taking the time to stay with us and for the opportunity to talk to you here this morning.
there's my.
It's been lovely.
Great.
Thank you ever so much.
And you, bud.
Thank you.